Now, this next section is coming from the divine forces of the lunar nakshatras as portrayed in the Vedas by the author named Radhe. This author, as I often talk about in this part of the video, this author is a sidereal astrologer. So she has the idea that the sidereal, the nakshatras and the signs are combined. And so there's often times where we have to take with a grain of salt what an author says about a nakshatra. For example, Magha in the sidereal astrologers is considered to be only in Leo. So oftentimes people will correlate Magha with Leo-like qualities, always, inherently. But as we know, it's possible, we don't know for sure, but it's possible that there are parts of Magha that fall into Virgo. I'd say that's pretty well the case. The first bit of Virgo likely falls into Magha as well. So this is why we have to kind of be careful when we're reading this author's take on the Magha native. We have to make sure that we're being mindful and watchful of cues where their artistic license might pull in an idea of the Magha native as being strictly Leo-like, or even to have the qualities of its nakshatra, Vimshotri Lord, which is known to be Ketu. So these distortions can happen for this author, but this author is still very sharp, well-researched, and usually most of their stuff comes from a positive assertion of her knowledge of the nakshatras. You can check out my other videos where I describe the deities of the nakshatras. It comes from this author. So she's very well researched in all things Vedic. We just have to, in today's day and age, as explorers of the ancient mythos of the nakshatras in a modern context with tropical astrology, we have to be mindful of where we get our information. Doesn't mean it's useless information. We just have to pick through the seeds. Got to pick out the stems, you know? So let's dig into it. This is the Magha native. Magha is deeply connected with the ancient ancestry of man. It's a divine lineage originating with the rishis, who are offsprings of the gods, as well as Manu Vaivashvata and his imperial sons. As we've just learned, if you watch the video talking about the deity of Magha, which is the Pitris that I've created, we learned that there's two different pathways to self-realization of the lineage of the Pitris. There's the what did we call it? It was the Pitriyana, which relates to the moon path of ancestry coming from a common biological DNA man. That's the Pitriyana, the path of the moon. And then there's the Devayana, who follows the path of the sun, of the tropical astrology, of the soul, of the individuated soul consciousness of the Atman, that comes from something that's beyond the biological body. So, consistent with this exalted lineage, Magha translates as the mighty one, or the great one. The star of Magha, now this is a bit of astronomy, again coming from a sidereal practitioner. The star of Magha resides in the majestic mane of the lion, the Leo constellation, And its Yogatara star is Regulus, which the Western people have defined as Alpha Leonis. And it's a star referred to as the Little King due to its magnificent luminosity. So, again, this is somebody who believes the constellation of Leo is a fixed, set thing. So that's the caveat that I'm going to give there. But it is true that Regulus is the star that is referred to when we talk about Magha, the Nakshatra. Thank you for Gnan. Thanks for enjoying the video here today. So, the Magha native often exudes an air of royalty or preeminence. The Magha native has likely dedicated time to tracing his family lineage and his family heritage, which would include several notable ancestors. Fields involved in genealogy and/or genetics attract the attention of the Magha native, and this may evolve into a full-time career for them. Remember, this is usually when this book describes a native, they're usually referring to the person who has the moon in Magha as well as the ascendant in Magha. So examples of careers that might be good for a Magha native include forensics, medical genetics, wildlife biology, clinical geneticists, a genetic counselor, and so on. Likewise, books on the life and traditions of ancient times find a place on this native's bookshelf. A little bit of anthropological interest is involved in there. Now we learn that L. Ron Hubbard had the moon in Magha. He is the founder of the Church of Scientology. Hubbard held some unusual views regarding ancient life here on Earth. Wow, this totally makes sense. When I think of Hubbard, remember, Magha can be kind of, severe or rough and fierce in the way that they convey their stuff. It's interesting that Hubbard had a lot of backlash for his very interesting ways of understanding human lineage. According to Hubbard, somebody called Xenu, the dictator of the Galactic Confederacy, brought billions of people to Earth 75 million years ago. These people were all killed by hydrogen bombs. This theory was incorporated into Scientology, which postures that the immortal spirits of these aliens adhere to humans, causing spiritual harm. Wild. Now, back onto the Magha native. The Magha native holds great respect for their elders. Perhaps the Magha native is particularly close to a grandparent or a great aunt or uncle. For those family members who are deceased, the native senses their watchful presence and at times even seeks their advice and guidance. The native is peculiarly adept at communicating with helpers from the other side, both family members and others. Getting into the supernatural and channeling and mediumship and this kind of stuff. Now, a professional field that requires such adeptness has great appeal to the native. Examples include shamanism, as well as mediumship. The proficiency of connecting with souls on the other side is not dissimilar to the ability to communicate with animals and/or nature in general. In fact, telepathy and clairvoyance are also related to this aptitude. This is all very Magha stuff. Now, the sacrificial wish of Magha's ruling devatas is to prosper among their ancestors. That is a phrase that comes from the latter part of the Taittiriya Brahmana. This wish to prosper amongst their ancestors may manifest in one or more ways in the life of the Magha native. Firstly, the native has a strong desire to carry forward the notable accomplishments of their lineage. Secondly, the Magha native is likely to prosper from his relatives and or extended family members. Perhaps he's afforded a privileged position in the family business or bestowed a handsome inheritance. Note that one translation of Magha is wealth. Remember, it's gifts, it's rewards, it's something coming from the patrilineal focus or goal or objective of a whole family. If a person aligns themselves with that, they're going to be served as a vehicle and vessel for the interests of the ongoing family lineage. Where else is the family lineage going to channel its resources but through the person who's receptive to it? So this is why these people can get these things, these privileges, if they're open to it, if they're conscious of it, and naturally they probably would be if they have the moon or the ascendant or any prominence of planets in Magha. Lastly, a strong paternal sense draws the native's attention to those opportunities that require wisdom and maturity. The Magha native may be considered an elder within their community, or become the leader of a state or a nation. The native assumes this same position within their extended family, where their advice and leadership are often sought. Margaret Thatcher is somebody who had the moon in Magha. She exemplifies this aspect of Magha. Thatcher was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1979 to 1990. And prior to this, she was the leader of the Conservative Party for nearly 15 years. Now, should Magha be grossly afflicted, this can indicate a need for the native to work through some problematic DNA passed down from their ancestors, or as a result of their own past lives. Through their purification, however that goes, the native releases future generations from inherited or genetically encoded vasanas, which are patterns that are potentially destructive or counterproductive. Stopping the generational trauma. That's a very Magha thing. And sometimes, it's almost like a person who has to experience a disease or some kind of genetic DNA mutation or malfunction, and they are sick for a long time, but eventually they get over it. It's like when the plague came through in medieval England in the 1600s, it wiped out about 90% of the population. 10% of the population for some reason survived and was allowed to continue on, and they got used to the virus, the plague. Their bodies succumbed to it, even though they were probably sick for a long time before they could get it. So they took on this illness in order to purify it. In the same way, a Magha person with gross afflictions in the nakshatra of Magha might find themselves with counterproductive and potentially destructive vasanas. It's genetically encoded characteristics that they have to purify somehow. Susie Underwood is correct when she says a Magha native might be the one in the family to help heal familial curses or traumas. That's correct, Susie. And unfortunately, usually, the only way out of it is through it for the Magha native. It's very possible that afflictions in Magha can show things that continue on that don't get healed, that the person is just afflicted with them and can't move through them. But if the whole chart is conducive to evolution, it's possible that Magha Nakshatra natives will find themselves entangled in a family that's full of trauma and curses that need healing, and they end up being the person for whom a huge part of their energy, positively speaking, is getting over these curses and traumas, helping the family get through it. It's a beautiful soldier consciousness that can be occurring there if that's the case. Now, finally, let's recall in the Rig Veda that Surya's grand wedding procession commences in Magha. The bridal procession of the sun's daughter, Surya, which the divine mother creator Aditi dispatches, moves along. The oxen of their chariot are whipped along in the Magha constellation. She's taken to her husband's house in the Falguna constellations. And that comes from the Rig Veda. So thus, as with the Falgunis, Magha gives a special affiliation with grand and grandiose celebrations, celebrating the greatness that is, reflective of, a lot of these nakshatras have a chronological narrative. The chronology of the marriage being pushed along in Magha leads to the marriage that happens in the Purva and Uttara Falgunis. It's not always obvious, and this book doesn't always convey the chronology, but in this case, it's a useful thing to see how Magha is leading to the Falgunis. And so Magha is conducive to marriages and to large events and celebrations in this way, shooing them forward. Wonderful.